Have you been doing inner child work and it just doesn't seem to be getting you anywhere? Maybe it feels like you're spending a lot of quality time with your inner child or really starting to understand them, but it's not really showing any difference in your everyday life. If this has been your experience, then today's episode is for you. Welcome to the Unweaving Chronic Pain Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Andrea Moore, founder of the Whole Self Integration Method. And I am here to help you go from a life that has been feeling stuck and limited and shrinking due to chronic pain, chronic emotional pain, chronic anxiety, or depression, to one that feels like it is constantly growing and expanding, where you actually get to get out and live life in whatever ridiculous, crazy way that looks like for you. And if you're looking for help on your journey, then you have come to the right place. Whether you are brand new to the healing world, or you have been on this healing journey for a while and feeling like it is not actually translating into getting out and living life, or you are feeling like it is just making you even more anxious or more crazy, then you are absolutely in the right place. My philosophy is that we heal so we can live. And if the inner work you're doing isn't translating into a bigger, brighter, more exciting, more joyful, more fulfilled, passionate life, then something is not adding up. And I am here to help you figure out what is going on. Together, we can identify what might be the hang up for you. We can do that on an energy up-level call. You can see the link in the show notes for that. The call is going to be a chance for an individualized look about what is going on for you and developing a plan to move you forward from that. These calls are going to be available for a limited time only. Right now, I do happen to have some space on my schedule for them, but that might not be for so long. So if you are wanting to book one of those calls, I would recommend do it now, because start of the school year, things like that, I'm probably going to be closing down availability for that. So go ahead, get signed up, and I can't wait to talk to you then. All right, in this episode, we're really going to be doing a deep dive exploration of inner child work and why what you're doing might not be working. Here's the thing, I have designed this episode in a way that's a little bit more for people who already have a general understanding of inner child work. I am going to be explaining it, so even if you are newer to it, feel free to listen in, but it's not going to be a comprehensive overview. It's a little bit more geared towards someone who is a little more familiar with the language of like inner work or inner child work. And this, I highly recommend if you consider yourself like really well versed in inner child work, do not skip this episode. In fact, it might even be more important for you to listen, because what I discuss here today might be a really big mindset shift. And it's something that once you see what I'm pointing out here, you'll be able to adopt your own practice or adopt how you teach it or work with other people to be so much more effective. So listen in, be ready to learn something new, be open. And again, this is not a comprehensive overview. What I'm talking about does not necessarily apply to every time we work with inner children, but it is something that I have just gotten so many individual examples of recently in the past couple weeks that I just felt so compelled to talk about this, because I was like, oh my gosh, why does this keep happening? Whether it is just somebody relaying, hey, I was just working with this practitioner and here's what we did with my inner child, or it is like an Instagram reel that is spouting really, in my opinion, harmful information about working with your inner child. I just really wanted to address this. So let me first tell you about the lens that I look at inner child work from, because I think it's helpful to understand kind of what my bias is. Because when it comes to healing work, there's many ways to look at it. There's many different lenses. Most importantly, you have to do it from a way that works for you. And I'll even encourage that a step further, because what I find is a lot of people are like, well, this is the way that works for me. And they're kind of stuck and rigid in that. And if you're like, no, I have my way, then the question is it giving you the outcomes that you are expecting? Do you know what outcomes you are looking for from the inner work you are doing? If not, it might be worth taking some time to just be like, what am I looking for? Like, why am I spending my time doing this in the first place? There isn't one answer to that. but what is it for you? Why are you doing it? And are you getting the results you would expect based on your reasoning and your rationale? So for me, I love exploring the nervous system. I love exploring the brain, what's stored in our nervous system, our deeper inner world. I love playing with this stuff. So part of this work for me is always just like an inner exploration and getting to know myself better and getting to know what parts of my nervous system are holding on to. Like, if all I got out of a, inner child or inner work session, whether that is just, spending 20 minutes working with myself on it or working with a practitioner, I'm pretty satisfied. I'm like, ooh, that's really cool. However, that's only to a certain extent. I love the exploration. I love learning new things, but then I also do need to see it translating into actual shifts in my life, right? While I do not expect every session at all, and I go into every session being very neutral and outcome independent to things, over time I do want to see that, like, oh, hey, because I've done this exploration around this area, this thing in my life has shifted and has gotten easier. And usually, again, there's bringing that intention to it of like, okay, maybe I'm really stuck on organization of my home or scheduling, or there's pain or there's anxiety around something. It's like I'm specifically doing inner work to see what might be going on in the nervous system and then to bring more ease into that, because I've already decided that that is something that I want to work on. Right. So it's like, I got to see a result here. So I'm just saying this to be like, I do see a lot of people who are maybe doing a lot of inner child sessions, or they have been working with a practitioner that really emphasizes that. And when I, start asking like, what results have you seen? Like, what was the purpose? They're really not sure. They're kind of like, oh, I was just like told that I needed to do that. But like, yeah, I don't know what it's translating to. So I think it really helps to have the intention behind it. Intention behind anything we do is really important. So I just wanted to start from there. And so then my bias really is for inner child work. It is about understanding where a child part is impacting the nervous system, our current nervous system, our present day nervous system, and throwing it into a dysregulated state based on like a past experience, which means we are reacting to a present day situation from a past child part. That alone can be helpful of like, this is why we're doing inner child work. And so then a successful inner child, working with, which might not just be within one session, this might be something that happens over time, really becomes about meeting the child where they are, discovering they exist in the first place. That has to come first. Then meeting them where they are, really understanding why their reaction is what it is. But ultimately, at the end, it is having our adult self back in charge, back in the lead position, back in being the one that is taking the control, making the decisions, and living our lives. Which means the child part gets to be set free to go play, to sleep, to have their needs met, which might be just getting a hug for the rest of eternity or whatever it might be, right? Like that all gets to happen in your mind's eye, but it's basically letting them off the hook from having to keep monitoring for threats and having to get back in the driver's seat in certain situations, right? Oftentimes when we are triggered, it is because a child part has taken the driver's seat, and they can't. They should not be in charge of that. And so that's why we do inner child work, to understand, why did you feel the need to get in the driver's seat in the first place? And how can I help you get out of the driver's seat so adult self can be sitting in the driver's seat and you get to go play and be a child? Now, how you go about that can be different. I think there are so many ways to approach the nervous system, to approach inner child work. I have my way of working with it. Other practitioners might have theirs. To me, there's really no right or wrong, as long as it's getting at these aspects. I don't really care how you're going about it, as long as that's what's happening, and then you're seeing the results that you want from doing that work. Because ultimately, this work takes time, it takes effort, it takes intention. So, it's part of how you're spending your life. And so you want to feel like I'm spending my life doing something that feels worthwhile. And that's the most important part. Again, it doesn't have to be this like huge outcome. I mean, some of the worthwhileness is just exploring your own nervous system or helping a child part through something that is really traumatizing in the past. Like that, even if it doesn't result in changes, that can be worthwhile enough as long as it's meaningful to you. So in the end, though, again, no matter how you kind of go about that middle part, the adult self needs to be taking charge. And this is the piece I see missing over and over and over. And I want to talk about not only how to bring that part in, but also where we go wrong in the process when that piece is missed. Because I feel like when that piece is missed, then there's like a whole sequence of things that often is happening in the interim that not only is that part being missed, but we're actually just like re-traumatizing our inner child part. So for the inner child, I want to include another way that I approach this, and I do think is really important to approach this. I do not see the inner child as a single entity. We do not have one inner child. That makes no sense. We have infinite inner children. They are infinite inner child parts. And let's also define what is a child. To me, inner child does not have to be that young. To me, about 25 years old or younger is considered inner child. This is going to differ slightly from person to person. And the reason I say 25 years old is because that is the time and that is the age where our prefrontal cortex has fully developed for most people. This can occur even later when you are neurodivergent, and also men tend to have it be later. So I would say if I'm working with a man, I am really looking at 30 years old and younger as inner child. I think, again, this is also really, really important because we need to be able to see, are we looking through a child lens or are we looking through an adult lens? Are we looking through a fully developed prefrontal cortex that is equipped to handle whatever situation occurred, or is it a not fully developed prefrontal cortex? To me, that is the marker. And it's so, so important to see that there's not just one single inner child, because the needs at different times of your life is going to differ. So to me, it's like anytime I'm doing inner child work, it's almost like I'm starting from a fresh slate and I'm meeting a new part, unless it's like I'm purposely coming back to a part that I've already gotten to know. I see it as like, oh, hello, this new part that I'm getting to know and learning about for the first time. So why do we even need inner child work? The majority of inner child work is really needed because our younger self experienced something that was beyond the capacity of the nervous system in that moment. It was beyond the brain development in that moment, right? It just could not handle and take in and understand and process or make sense of any given situation in that moment of time. This can include something as horrific as sexual abuse to a child, where the brain literally just cannot comprehend what is happening on so many levels: physical, emotional, spiritual, and just the overall sense of safety is completely demolished, right? To even really minor situations where there's no malintent. To me, it's like we can, I will lump the word trauma. I've talked about this a lot in earlier episodes of like, I kind of hate that we throw around the word trauma so much, and I don't think they should all be considered equal at all. However, to a child part, we have to see that in a moment, the nervous system, when it's brought into dysregulation, can be interpreted as trauma, but it's like a interpretation gone wrong, if that makes sense. Not true, like big T trauma. But we're not going to get into that nuance here. But it's like a parent who maybe had to rush off to work while the child was, maybe they were feeling sick that morning, or they were really feeling scared they had a new camp that they were going to, but the mom had to rush off to work to, whatever. She had to be at work. She had a patient. She had an important meeting, whatever it was. And the child, their emotional needs that morning were not met. And due to the brain being really egocentric, especially at young ages, makes it mean something about themselves. They internalize it. They make it mean I don't matter. I'm not loved, whatever it might be. And I just want to say, for any parents listening, I want to put a caveat on that as I give that as an example. that is only going to imprint on the child if that is happening over and over and over, and there's a lack of connection. And this is something that, like, a one-time situation like that does not create trauma in a child. That being said, it doesn't mean that there isn't one young part of the child that experienced something that was really hard in a moment. And it might be something that you end up kind of revisiting in inner work that pops up. You work with it. That child part kind of sees the whole picture, understands she was loved, and you kind of move on, and it's like not a huge deal or not necessarily hard to work on. It doesn't mean that you don't work with it. I just want to say, for any parents listening, you are not going to create trauma in your child by going to work. That is a very important thing to be able to do. And this actually gets into a lot of what we're going to be talking about, is so often at the expense of, or with the intent of trying not to like traumatize our inner child, we actually end up creating more trauma. And we do the exact same thing with our kids. You could probably take what I'm going to say in a lot of this episode and just replace like your actual child with this, and you will start to see where you do this to your own child. And I say that with being someone who is guilty of it as well. I catch myself in a lot of these things with my own child or with my own inner children, because we are trying so hard to make sure we are not creating any discomfort or any harm or any trauma, and it's just not possible. And that desire to try not to create trauma often ends up backfiring so much and creating more trauma. But that is a side note. Anyways, so really, I want to note a few common scenarios that I have seen just over the years of working with people where this, what I'm talking about, where people are working with their inner child in a way that's re-traumatizing them, is pops up. Just to have some tangible things to speak to. Often what I see or hear about in clients is where they are having to care for younger siblings to a much higher degree than they are emotionally capable of. Or they are given like household tasks, or even having to go out and get a job or make money that is beyond the capacity of their brain development, beyond their nervous system development. And there's a massive amount of responsibility that is just not age or developmentally appropriate that is put on them. And their nervous system really has trouble coping with that. And again, I'm going to clear something up because I think it's important. There is a massive, massive difference between what I just said and asking a 7-year-old to start helping out with household chores that are age or developmentally appropriate for that child, like making their school lunch, maybe helping even make their siblings lunch. Because doing that is actually essential to building the capacity, to building their resilience, to building their brain, to building a functioning prefrontal cortex, so that we aren't traumatizing it because there's no capacity to do things and to hold responsibility. So there is asking your child to do something or putting responsibility on them is not an issue if it is age appropriate and they are supported through the process and they are, taught how to do something. And it's not just like, oh, today you're responsible for making your lunch and there's like no instruction or anything given, right? Like that's going to create the trauma. But if they are guided through and helped and assisted, and it is a age and developmentally appropriate thing, this is, essential to brain development and actually will ward off and protect against future trauma. So versus, right, a child that's like, if you don't make your lunch for your younger sibling, they're going to starve, or like they're going to die and it's going to be your fault, right? Like that is not age appropriate. That is way too much responsibility being thrown on a child. That is just not appropriate for their brain. So let's carry now somebody who's had something like this put on them forward into adulthood. Because that child, maybe now they've grown up and now they have a boss who, maybe isn't the most emotionally intelligent person. And all of a sudden they just get a task, maybe it's just thrown in their email of, hey, by the way, you need to finish this. If you don't, we're going to lose this client. So I need this done by the end of the day, right? Maybe it's this all of a sudden this task that feels really big. There's a lot of responsibility put on them and they don't quite know how to handle it. It was unexpected, whatever. It carries this heavy burden of responsibility. This may then trigger up that 7-year-old self and send that person into a fight, flight, freeze, or even fawn response right? Which can be a variety of responses based on which one they get thrown to, but it might be like massive anger at the injustice they were asked to do such a thing, right? And so they're spiraling, they're so angry, they're calling their friend, they're venting, like, oh my gosh, like, I cannot believe that I have to do this. This is bullshit. Someone else should be doing it, whatever, right? There's just like all this anger that might come out, which is like that fight response. Maybe they flight. Maybe they just quit their job. Maybe that is like the last straw. They're like, that's it. I'm constantly being asked to do too much, and they just quit. And often when it's a trauma response or it's like a inner child thing that keeps coming out, you probably have a history of this happening, right? It's like, it's not the first time you feel like you kind of constantly feel like, oh my gosh, why am I always ending up at jobs where there's just too much responsibility placed on me? And it's because something is being looked to heal, and there's, something more, there's something deeper going on. To me, any repeat scenarios are like worth being like, what's going on there, right? Or maybe you just freeze up. They like procrastinate all day long. They pretend they didn't see it. Now they're just like stuck doom scrolling, and they like want to work on it, but they like just cannot bring themselves to do it, right? That's like just total freeze, like this overwhelm that happens. Or maybe somebody, this, same person, they're at home with their partner, they're constantly getting spats about, chores around the house, or they feel like they're being asked to do too much. There's like too much being put on them. They're just kind of in this constant state of overwhelm. And, while it's not always this way, I think sometimes a really big indicator, because I think sometimes we see it and sometimes we just do not see it for ourselves. Like, right, we really feel like we are in the thick of it, and it's like everything, like, so basically we're feeling like a complete victim in our own lives. And when you're deep in that, it's hard to see that it's maybe there's something deeper going on and you're not, there's actually a way out. So a sign of this, and which can be a really, really hard one to come to grips with if you are deep in it, is that when you find yourselves telling people about it or venting about it, or like, oh my God, can you believe what my boss asked me to do? Or can you believe that my partner didn't take out the trash? Or, whatever it is, that people are like, you don't ever feel like you're getting validated. People are like, oh, okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, that sucks. I'm not sure that that's that big of a deal. Why can't you just do that thing? You know what I mean? Or like, it's like they don't, their response does not match your emotional response. It is because often there's an emotional internal response that is much bigger than the situation at hand, because it's triggering up a childhood part. And so it's the part that needs to be worked with, not the present day scenario, right? So this is where inner child work comes to play. Or maybe if you are more consciously aware of it, it's often when you find yourself being like, oh my God, I know it's so stupid that I'm getting triggered by this, but like, here's what's going on. We're like, I shouldn't be mad at this, but like, I'm so mad. I'm like, maybe you're like, okay, I know this is literally just a trash can. And I had this the other week where it's like, my husband's like, great. He's the one who takes out the trash. And he pretty much just does it every week. Like, I don't have to remind him. And there was like one trash can in our house that like he just, I think, does not realize exists. And it just kept getting fuller and fuller. And I just got so mad at it. And I was just like, okay, why am I really so mad at this? Like, I knew it was not right-sized for the situation at hand. And all I really had to do was being like, hey, like, don't forget about that trash can. And he'd be like, oh, I'm just not even aware it exists, right? And it's just one of those situations where I caught it and I could tell, where I'm like, I wanted to get so mad, I wanted to vent at it, but I knew it was like so not about that. There was something deeper, right? So I did some inner work exploration, for example. So let's get into inner child work gone wrong with these certain scenarios. Again, we could give a million scenarios of where inner child pops up, but those are some really common ones I see in just like day-to-day stuff. So one really common response I see, and I've had people very recently literally come and tell me that this is what other people told them to do, or whatever practitioner they're working on recommended, and it's not working, which is obviously then why they're coming to me, is that they are basically told for like an equivalent scenario. Let's say it was recognized, like they worked, in a session and like recognized, hey, my child self had way too much responsibility. So whenever I'm feeling responsibility, I get really overwhelmed, I get triggered, and then that's responsible for all these fights and bickering around the house. The recommendation is like, well, your inner child can't handle it. And so you shouldn't have to do those things. Make your partner do it. The partner needs to pick up the slack, and they need to be the one that is always making sure that the trash is taken out, for instance. Which, don't get me wrong, sounds really nice when that's causing chaos in your life. But here's the thing. Not only is that like really unfair to put on your partner, I can't tell you how many times I see advice that is like forgetting that there is another nervous system that needs to be taken into account. Like, can we have an adult conversation here? What about the partner? What if the partner has the exact same trauma response? Then what? They just have to suck it up because they didn't ask or didn't go to therapy first? You know what I mean? Like it's like mind-blowing to me how many practitioners put extra load on someone else without taking that nervous system into account or without having like an adult conversation about it. Not saying that they might not end up there, which I'll talk about in a second, but you cannot just expect that someone else is basically going to pick up the slack for you. Because here's the thing, when you do that, we are making an adult decision based on the emotional dysregulation of a child, of what our inner child is feeling, which means that is still placing your inner child in the driver's seat of your life. And so your inner child is still going to be stuck feeling responsible for something that she is not responsible for. She drove that decision. She therefore is the one that made it happen. Do you see how that is putting her in the driver's seat? She's in the driver's seat of an adult's life. That is not fair to her. So that means even if you have a partner who is willing to do that, who is like, oh, I had no idea that the trash was triggering your inner child and that I could just solve this problem for you by being the one to make sure that you never have to take out the trash again. Okay, so let's say you do have a partner that does that. Great, that's amazing. But guess what? Your inner child is still in the driver's seat. It won't feel resolved. It might feel like good for like a week, but like you're going to still feel there's just this tension. It won't feel like it's enough. You're going to find something else to nag on them for, something else to get upset about. And I don't mean that in any type of like judgmental way whatsoever. It's just like you will still feel the turmoil there, whether it's about the trash or now you have found something else, because the inner child is still looking to get the hell out of that seat. She doesn't want to be there. She should not be driving the bus of your life, right? The child should not be driving, period. And then we can also bring in the component of shit happens, okay? Your partner goes out of town. They get sick. They forget, right? Which means that like if they slip up or they aren't able to do it, then what? Then you're just going to get re-triggered up all over again. And it's going to be, right? It's like you're now at the mercy of somebody else versus being able to be like, how could I just see like a trash can that's overflowing, because sometimes that happens, and not feel hijacked by it, right? Like ultimately that's the goal. Like not that you need to live with an overflowing trash can, but that like when and if it happens, because it will, that like you're like, oh, okay, look, all it is an overflowing trash can and I have hands and I can just go like deal with it. Or just like remind my partner, hey, heads up, honey, like the trash is full. Can you take it out? And it's just like, there's no emotional drama around it, right? Basically, what so often is happening is that our inner children through inner child work are only just retaught that there's no adult here taking responsibility for her. And she still has to be constantly the one that's on the lookout for threats. That's the one that's monitoring, that's the one that has to be like in charge of making sure shit's getting done. Basically the exact same thing that she had to do in childhood when there was like, while the adult may have been present, they were not doing the things that they should have been doing. So she had to take on those duties. She's still just stuck there because her emotional reaction is driving the adult decision. And all that happens is she's re-traumatized, or the reason for her dysregulation is enforced because it just proves, see, I have to be the one that's like looking out because otherwise no one else is going to do it. Now, this is what I want to say is that this doesn't mean, because I think people hear this and they're like, oh, so now I'm the one who's stuck taking out the trash all the time. No, not at all. The actual solution still might end up being that your spouse or your partner takes out the trash. This is not the issue here. There's nothing wrong with that. It is about the emotional state that the decision is being made out of that we care about. This is so crucial. If you are ever taking an action after inner child work, or after discovering that your inner child has been running the show or driving the bus, whatever you want to say, what needs to be switched, where the healing happens, where we don't re-traumatize it, is by making sure that decision is always done from the adult, mature, responsible self, not done out of, oh, my inner child can't handle that, oh, therefore this is the action I should take, right? Like, it's not done out of the decision isn't made out of the dysregulated state. It's made out of the regulated, adult, responsible self state, which means that maybe you've done this work with your inner child, and then you go and you discover, okay, she feels really overwhelmed very easily. Okay, now I'm kind of like updating her to current circumstances, that I'm an adult, that she doesn't have to be doing this. And now from a regulated state, you approach your partner, you can fill them in on as much as you want to, and be like, hey, you know what? I really feel like we need to talk about chores. How can we divvy them up so it feels fair, so we're both good with them, so we, are both doing the ones that we feel comfortable doing? And maybe your partner's like, oh, I'll take out the trash. Yeah, I actually don't mind doing that at all. And then, cool, right? That was like the mature adult self that had a conversation, that communicated and made a decision, not from like fear or overwhelm from the child state. This is crucial to healing the inner child. And this is the part that gets missed all the time. Inner child healing cannot happen without you being able to access your mature, adult, responsible part of yourself and putting them back in charge. And this can be really hard for a lot of people if you do not have access to that. And so that might be where you need to start, not with inner child work. I find way too many people getting into inner child work, in my opinion, way too soon. Like, you can't, to me, doing inner child work when you do not have access to that part of yourself, even if it's hard to access, even if it's fleeting access, that's fine. If you don't have some access to like your true self, your adult self, your mature self, a part that can like really access your prefrontal cortex and logic and feel responsible, now you just have like two children that are like trying to take care of each other. And it honestly makes things, I think, a lot more of a mess. I think it's a lot more layers to get through. I don't think it's helpful at all, and I see it backfire way too often. Honestly, I feel like most of the clients that I see one-on-one have been doing trauma healing work for a really long time, are either practitioners themselves, or have done like every course on the freaking internet, or have worked with like 10 different practitioners doing this type of work. And the pretty much thing that I see with 98% of the clients I work with is they miss this foundation. They're trying to get into too much of like the deeper inner child, like deep trauma stuff, without establishing a foundation of meeting their adult responsible self. And that is a process in itself sometimes. But we can't do inner child work and healing until we do that. Now look, I could vent for days, but so much inner child work is just very sneaky spiritual bypassing around having to take this adult responsible role. Now, I'm not saying every inner child work does this at all. You might be doing excellent inner child work. I really think that once I call this out, you'll know if this is true for you or not. If you're open to it, if you're open to hearing it, maybe not if you're not open. But I think people know when they hear it, because I've called this out for a lot of people, especially even practitioners, and they're like, It's a hard here. It's a hard truth, but they recognize it and they know it if they've been doing this. And I do this too, guys. Like, there's no judgment here at all. There's no like, nothing's gone wrong. I mean, I guess you can say some stuff has gone wrong, but it's not like from some personal place or some personal fault, right? It's like, oh, you're just learning something new. You're seeing something through a different lens. I was guilty of all this stuff before I discovered this lens and really started to see it. And then I was like, oh my God, I can't unsee it now. Because so much inner child work is literally, unintentionally, it is so unintentional, throwing your poor inner child under the bus, basically. Like, it makes her the excuse and the reason you can't do something. I can't tell you how often it's like, oh, well, and it's not necessarily said in this direct of a way. I can't really think of a good phrase right now that I hear, but it's basically being like, well, I can't do this thing that my adult self or my true self desires because of my inner child and what she experienced. And like, you know how shitty that feels for your inner child? Like, imagine being 10 years old and your mom telling you to your face, well, because you're just so scared all the time, or because you have ADHD, or because you have anxiety about whatever, I can't go do what I want to do. I can't go apply for my dream job. Like, that feels like shit. Yet we do this to our inner child, like, a lot. It's basically like, oh, well, but it's done in this, like, very, like, often really kind and compassionate way of like, oh, like, my inner child is, like, so scared of this thing. And so, like, because of my, like, respect and love for her and understanding for her, like, I can't do that, right? It's, like, done in this really compassionate way with, like, really good intentions. So let's give an example. Let's say someone has a desire. Let's say they, want to start a business or get out of chronic pain, right? Person struggles with taking action, whatever action they know that they should, quote unquote, should be doing. It's like they're stuck, they're paralyzed, they just can't seem to do it. Okay. So maybe now they're working with someone or whatever, have read about inner child work. And through inner child work, they discover an inner child part that is feeling really, really terrified in relation to this thing, right? Maybe, well, hold on, we won't go there yet. So in the best case scenario here, during this process, okay, you discover this part that you don't know anything about yet. So you actually take the time to make sure she's okay with being worked with, to sit with her, to, if she's ready to talk, to listen to her, if she even can talk. And you really take the time to just be with her and then over time gain understanding of what is going on. I can make a whole other podcast about how much inner child work blows past so many of these steps and often comes from this place of like assuming what the child is fearing, for instance, or is experiencing. Like, I have so many people who will come to me and be like, oh, well, my issue is because when I was a child, XYZ happened, so I have, anxious attachment, blah, 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 blah. And it's like when we actually talk to the child, it's like not that at all. And they just spoke for the child, which is, again, kind of a form of re-traumatizing the poor child who like just never got to actually express what was happening. Somebody just made an assumption that often is like a very logical assumption, but it doesn't mean it's correct. Like, we can't know what the child is experiencing or what they experienced. We have to get to know it from them. Okay, but that's a whole different podcast. So we'll assume this part has gone well. And so because of this, they discover that inner part is really terrified of being seen, right? Which can result in chronic pain because that can create a lot of tension in the body, or it can make it really hard to start a business, for instance, because start a business, you got to put your face out there. So now you have this, okay? It's like, okay, so I have an inner child part that is stopping me from taking this action that is based on this desire that I want in life. All right, we're all on the same page. And this part is terrified of being seen. Okay, so we've kind of like established like, here's like a root thing that needs to now be worked with. Because just knowing this is helpful, but you kind of want to do something about it, right? A worst case scenario, which I see happen far too often, is they just agree with the child and they take no action. Oh, you're scared of being seen? Okay, well, I guess I can't start an online business then because that requires my face to be seen. And this leaves the child feeling affirmed that, yes, clearly being seen is terrifying. And therefore, like, then she was the one who had to tell the adult self that, right? Like, the adult asked her about it and the child told her, oh, I'm scared to be seen. And then because of that, the adult was like, oh, you're scared to be seen? You're right. We shouldn't be seen. And so the child's like, well, clearly this adult is not in charge, and I need to keep telling them about threats because otherwise they're not going to see them, right? You see how this keeps the child in charge in a real shitty position, and it's going to prevent you from taking action. So it's like it shrinks your life massively to take an approach like that. All right, number 2 scenario of what could happen from this. That is like a gone wrong scenario. You take the approach of trying to assure her that she is safe to be seen, right? So it's like whatever her fear is, you're trying to convince her that she's safe. This is like such a common one. It's like, oh, well, you're scared of that? We have to convince you that you're safe. So you use all sorts of affirmations to be like, you're safe, it's okay to be seen, and all this stuff, which is frankly grossly unfair to her. Let's say this particular part experienced abuse when she was like literally seen by her dad. Like basically her presence triggered his anger, and she learned when I'm like seen, I am subject to abuse or to trauma, okay? It isn't safe. It wasn't safe for her to be seen. And you have to remember that she's stuck as a child part. She is still living as like living the world through that child lens. So to her, she's still like perpetually in that. So to try to convince her that it's safe is gonna make her really distrust you. And also be like, you clearly cannot see threats because there is an active threat and you're not seeing it, and you're trying to tell me I am safe when I am not safe. All right, it is really unfair to convince her it is safe to be seen in this scenario. Now, depending on the situation and the complexity of what occurred, because obviously like what actually happened and, you know, what she experienced and her age all make a huge difference in how we work with this. You can help her understand that while she is still a child, it is your adult self that is here now and that you are grown and in the present moment, even like telling her the year, like it's not 1986, it is 2024, right? That your adult self, whether your adult self is safe or unsafe to be seen, is now the one in charge of the situation. And she, like that you're the buffer there. Often, you know, it's like to update her makes a lot of sense, to let her know, again, that you're the adult, that here's all these times where I have been safe to be seen. Maybe dad isn't even alive anymore, or you don't ever see him, like you are no contact with him. So you can like update her on all of that. All that's really great and helpful. But let's say you are still in contact. It's letting her know that she never has to make contact with him again. Not that it's like, oh, well, now you're safe to because now we've like solved our relationship. I mean, you can say all that too. Like that's all fine. But she basically needs to know that it's you, the responsible, caring adult self, that's going to be the one that's being seen, not her. That you're going to be keeping her safe, and that she is safe to do what she wants, and that she never has to be seen if she doesn't want to be. But you, the adult, may choose to be seen. But basically, she doesn't need to have a role in that. She doesn't need to know about any of that. I mean, you can kind of just briefly let her know that, but like, she gets to let go of that. Like, think about when you're a kid, you weren't aware of what your parents went off and did during the day. Like, we had no freaking clue what our parents were doing, and that's how it should be. As kids, like, we don't need to have this, like, intricate understanding of what's going on in our adults' lives. And that's how it should be with her. Like, she just doesn't have to worry about whether it's safe to be seen or not, because she can choose to never be seen again, but you get to choose to be seen because you're the adult. It's basically none of her damn business, in a very loving way. Obviously, don't say that, but right? But it's like, it's not just like let's say a child who wants to know about like the family's financial situation and hey, what's the budget? And it's like, there's a certain point where it's like, it's not age appropriate. Like, it is none of your business what's going on, in like a really loving way, because that's not your concern. That's not what you should be concerned about or having your nose in as a child, right? Like, that's not, it's an inappropriate responsibility that would be placed on them for them to have to be worrying about them. You want to free her from worrying about what you are up to. She just needs to know she's safe to do what she wants to do. All right. So again, trying to assure an inner child that they are safe to do XYZ is often really unfair and is just going to keep them like traumatized and feeling scared or feeling that thing. The last one that I really want to cover of where inner child work often goes wrong is where we ask our inner child way too many questions, expect them to have answers for us, or ask her their opinion on something that is a present day situation, or questions that are just not age appropriate. Y'all, this is the one where it's like, notice where you do this with your own kid. So much. We ask so much of our inner child and our real children sometimes. Again, I was really guilty. This is the one that I was by far the most guilty of when I started this work, and I really have to like watch with my own kid. Because here's the thing. When we don't have access to our adult responsible self, what we try to do is outsource. It is so unfair to outsource what our adult self should be doing and in charge of to our inner child. Usually that is just placing the exact same trauma on them, or just placing another trauma on them, depending on what they experience. Like, it's just not fair for your child to be asking basically opinions on what you should be doing in your adult present life from your inner child. They should not be deciding what you as an adult are doing. Neither should your actual child. Your inner child should not have a role in deciding where you live, what job you do, right? Like who you marry or things like that. Is insane to be asking that. Like, if you wouldn't ask it to, like, when you get to know that inner child part you're working with and you find out their age, whatever question you are asking, imagine asking it to an actual kid that age. And if it feels really weird to ask it to a kid that age, then you should not be asking it to your inner child. And I will say, as parents, we really need to watch this one, because I think in the gentle parenting world and this world that has now done this really beautiful thing of recognizing that children do have a voice, we are giving children a voice in things that they have no business giving a voice in. They do not get a say in certain things that are an adult's decision. So it might be something that you really do need to recalibrate here, because it might feel like, well, of course, like if you're like, wait, why wouldn't I ask my, child where we are living, or like what school they should go to, or things like that? It's like, you might need to do some recalibration here, or like maybe what they want for dinner that night, things like that, right? Like if you're constantly asking them these kinds of questions, and like letting them answer and letting their answers dictate like what you as a family unit are doing, yeah, there's some recalibration that's needed. I needed to recalibrate this a whole lot. And so it's like, I feel you. I think it's what we're taught, but all it is, when you really understand what it really is, it is outsourcing the adult decision. It's because you don't know the answer to the question, and you don't want to have to do the hard decision of finding the answer, right? And again, I'm calling myself out as much as I'm calling you out, and it's not from any type of judgmental way at all. It's really fucking hard to make adult decisions. So if we can just get our child to answer it, all of a sudden we don't have to do it. If we can get our inner child to answer it, then we don't have to do it. It takes the pressure off our adult self, but it's putting it on your inner child. It's not fair to them. All right. I see this one so often. And then the last thing with these questions too is that, again, if you're doing inner child work and you're really understanding that each inner child is its own separate part, it's always crucial to be understanding what age they are, or approximate age. It does not need to be exact. Because again, you can't ask a 2-year-old to be like, oh, what were you emotionally experiencing in that moment? They can't answer that. A 2-year-old cannot answer that. They do not have the brain development to answer that. They do not have the emotional maturity to answer that. That's not a dig on the 2-year-old. They just don't. Their brain is not developed enough to answer such a thing, right? A lot of things that happen, I would say, like, 3, 4, 5 years old and younger. Again, it really depends on the child here and things like that. But especially like 3 or 2 years old and younger, right? When we're nonverbal, it's like they often cannot answer in words. It depends on, maybe how they are, how much of an understanding of language they have. I mean, especially in a baby or anything that happened even in the womb, right? It's like they can't have an answer for it because it happened pre-verbal. And so just really having your expectations on par with the brain development of the inner child you're working with is really important, okay? And again, I think as a whole, we've really moved into this place of we've gone away, which again is a really good thing from like, children have no idea what they're talking about and can't express themselves, to a place where we're kind of trusting them too much. Like we're putting too much on them and not really quite realizing how much they're still just figuring things out, and their brains just really aren't developed enough to be answering a lot of these emotional questions or understanding how to regulate themselves in certain ways. Again, it's not that there isn't room to teach them and to talk them through it all, but it's like when we're working with our inner child, especially one that wasn't taught that, you can't expect them to know that or to answer complex questions. It's just not fair to them. So there's got to be some, to me, this is where the somatic work and emotional work and really sensing into the feeling state is so amazing and helpful, and where our capacity to feel really big, uncomfortable emotions is crucial, because often that's what will show up, is it's a big, uncomfortable emotion that the child experienced that we are then tapped into, and there might not be words for it, but when we can fully feel it then for the child, who like wasn't even capable of feeling it in its bigness, that's what helps to feel it. But so many of us shut down that feeling because it's uncomfortable. We don't know how to deal with it ourselves. And then it just leaves the child stuck with it. So I hope that was eye-opening if you have been doing inner child work. I would love to hear any feedback if you're like, oh, damn, I see where I have been doing that. Again, no judgment. I did it too. People do it. It's fine. We are all learning this. And I would say the biggest number one reason that people do this is because they do not have contact with their adult, responsible self. They don't know how to have contact with that self. That part is so scary that it's just like, it feels way better to outsource it. And I can say, once I saw this, and in myself too, again, okay, this is, I teach this because this is exactly what I struggle. I'm still making contact with my adult self and constantly bringing her back on board and having her feel more and more capable. Like it's scary stuff. But once you see it, it becomes so obvious. This type of work, when we're doing it this way, will have like Band-Aid effects, right? You might get like some initial effects that feel good, so you don't pick up on it. But over time, you're just not getting the outcome you want. So if this is you, again, so much love, no worries, you are so not alone. I would say that this like lack of access to our adult responsible self is like pretty much the entire population, as evidenced by just looking around and seeing that we all suck at adulting. Again, it's not personal. That is really not your fault. I could go into a whole podcast of why that's happened. You came by it honestly. It is not a personal fault. It was never taught to you. But learning it now is your responsibility. And it's really the way into living a life that feels amazing, that you feel in charge of, where you feel like you get to live out your passions, be fulfilled, have joy, and is also essential for healing from chronic pain and anxiety and any really big emotional discomforts, because we need our adult self to do that. All right, I hope that was helpful. Again, book an energy up-level call if that is something that you want help to sort through. It is something that will absolutely change your life. And it is something that once you learn how to do it, it will completely shift the trajectory of your life, and you can take it into your entire life, right? When you have an adult responsible self who can make decisions, it changes your whole life for the better. So I cannot wait to see you on one of those calls, and I will talk to you later. Bye.